questions after they share with you their points of view. So let's give them a round of applause for coming out here.
Well, thanks so much. I'm Lori Gum, Shane McClellan, and I just have a little short PowerPoint. I thought it would tell you the basics about us so that we could get those sort of questions out of the way and then get down to some real dialogue about not only the paranormal, but these issues of fear that you're dealing with in this class, which is fascinating to us. I think this is a great idea for a class, and we're so thankful to come out and talk with you about some sort of new material for us, which is very exciting. So this is Shane and I. This is me. I went through a big haircut about a year ago, and we don't have any new pictures. I'm like, that's you? Yes, it is. So who are we? We are the Queer Ghost Hunters. That is exactly who we are. We used to be called the Stonewall Columbus Queer Ghost Hunters. Stonewall Columbus is the LGBTQ community center in Columbus. Shane and I both work there. That's kind of how we met. This is made up of our community members. So people ask, are you queer people hunting ghosts, or are you hunting queer ghosts? We are queer ghost hunters hunting queer ghosts, and we'll get into that. We started in 2015, and it was a community endeavor. We found it as a way that we could get our community together and do these sort of events. And we'll talk about the word hunt later. Remind me to talk about the choice of the word ghost hunting, which we have a little bit of problem with, but we'll tell you why. So why did we do this? Explore the unknown, okay, create bonds with our LGBTQ community members, and discover lost queer history. This is our big angle. So discover lost queer history. What do you mean by that? Well, we got started by, first of all, a random event. At Stonewall, we had the Humane Society come, and wouldn't you know it, 2 lesbian ghost hunters were part of that volunteer group. And so they asked us to go ghost hunting. Totally who doesn't want to go ghost hunting at some point in their life? We said sure, and Shane and I went to our first ghost hunt at Licking County Jail. I got grabbed, you got grabbed. It was really an astounding first ghost hunting experience. But on the car rides home, Shane and I started to wonder, why doesn't anybody ever hunt for queer ghosts? Okay? Because what would happen is that we would go, and let's say we found an entity that was female. The other people we were with, the first thing they would say, were you married? What was your husband's name? Did you have children? The presumption that these entities were heterosexual really started to bother us. Because think about this, where are ghosts found, right? We were disproportionately incarcerated in jails because very often, particularly for gay men, being gay was a crime. We were disproportionately put in insane asylums. When your family found out you were gay, potentially, you were locked away. That's where you find ghosts. And let's face it, we worked in theaters and opera houses, and that's where you find ghosts. So it made sense to us, number one, we're going to all the places that queer people were at. And why? Here's why. Because minorities are left out of history. Any minority is left out of history, and that's exactly why we thought that no one went to ghost hunt. So I'm going to let Shane talk a little bit about this. Old Licking County Jail, it was our first hunt, and we went back many times.
Yeah, so Old Licking County Jail it's a 120, 30-year-old jail, and it has a completely fascinating history in terms of like its like life history, I guess. So it was the only jail for like the entire county for the longest time, and at the time, Newark, where it's located, had like more brothels and bars than anywhere else in the country, which is kind of weird to think about, considering it's like a pretty small community even still today. But that created a lot of exciting action at the jail, and it ended up being one of our favorite places to go investigate, and kind of where we like learned how to do it. And what's the slides after that?
Yeah, I didn't go any deeper into that. The other places.
Do you want me to talk about it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, talk about some of the
So-
places we've been.
Yeah, so Collingwood's Art Center is up in Toledo, and it was originally a convent, like a nunnery. And part of what we were doing through our research was kind of discovering like where were these other places that queer people were kind of like living and working and having their lives. And one of those places was convents. And it turns out that a lot of like lesbian women would actually join the church to kind of be around other lesbian women. And they, I can't remember what the sister is.
First one.
Yeah, no, but what they would call each other.
Oh, particular friend.
Particular friends.
Or
So-
PFs.
Yeah.
PFs. My PF. Yes.
So like that was like the code word for being like, that's my girlfriend. And as a result of that, we ended up going up to Collingwood and doing a fantastic investigation. And really like that's when Lori ended up meeting
Madeline, we'll talk
Madeline.
about Madeline in a little bit. And just one note about this, you always hear about jokes about nuns being lesbian. As early as 450 AD, when Saint Augustine his sister was going into the convent in 450 AD. There is an extant letter where he warns her to beware of the lovers of women. So, you know, the knowledge and the sort of general wisdom that lesbians were in convents goes way back. And think about it. If you were a woman and didn't want to get married, where else you gonna go? See, how you gonna hang out with women all day? So, you know, it seems like a pretty good idea. Anyway, I wanted to give a little backstory on that. This one.
So
Which is
the
crazy.
Trans-Allegheny is in West Virginia, and we actually only went there one time, but we went there because NPR did this fascinating story on this guy who is still alive, and I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
We'll call him John. John was still alive, and he was actually a gay man in like the 50s or the 60s, and his family was like, well, that's a poor life choice. Let's institutionalize you, and he was there for like a decade, and it was, I think it was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, he started kind of like telling his story in an effort to kind of like preserve that part of the history of the asylum. And Trans-Allegheny is huge. I don't remember how many people it could hold, but it was kind of one of those places where like you definitely didn't want to end up. Like that was at the height of them like lobotomizing people to just completely, you know, kind of like wipe that part of your personality to try to fix you. And I don't think he was lobotomized.
No, he wasn't. But you know what Shane's saying, you think about that. You think about that. People in our community were lobotomized as normal practice to get rid of, you know, their sexual orientation. That's staggering. And again, this is the kind of history that not only people in our own community don't know, but the world in general doesn't know. It's a frightening place. It really was terrifying. You could imagine yourself in there. It was horrifying. It really was. I wish we had the link. We will find the link and send the interview of that gentleman to you. It's really a fascinating interview to hear on this one. We made it. That's the morning after. We made it out of Waverly Hills Cemetery.
So Waverly Hills is like pretty cool in terms of like the whole like ghost hunting perspective. That is called the Death Chute, and yeah, so it's a sanatorium. So people who had tuberculosis, which is like an infection in your lungs, you're like coughing up blood, and it was fatal like 90+% of the time. But at Waverly Hills, they actually had so many people dying from it that they decided it would be good for everyone's mental health if they could just kind of quietly remove the bodies. So they built this, it's like a 1/4 mile long tunnel. So you like kind of go underneath the building and then out the back. And at the height of it, there was basically a body leaving like every minute, like on several days. And it's something like 60,000 people ended up dying there. I don't think it actually has a lot of queer history, but it has a lot of, one of the entities there in particular is actually kind of like manifested by fear, which is, I guess, somewhat relevant to you folks. You kind of don't see it unless you're like actually afraid. And it presents itself as like this black, overwhelming mass, which I guess is kind of like fear.
But we weren't afraid, so we didn't see it.
Yeah.
Except walking down that body chute at midnight. It was just you and I think, actually went down. That took sort of more guts than I thought I had. So that was
like a quarter mile doesn't seem very long until you're like doing it in the dark, and then you're just like, it just lasts forever. Mansfield actually started originally as a reformatory for boys, so it was more of like a middle school and high school for kind of like troubled youth type thing before it turned into the Ohio State Reformatory, which was like an actual prison. But what the exciting part of Mansfield is, we actually had an entire wing devoted to gay men, and another wing as part of that section devoted to trans men, which is like shockingly progressive for any kind of prison at the time. And we were like, while we were there, we actually there's like this like fascinating graffiti on the walls. I don't remember the other guy's name. It's like Ronnie and Tommy.
Ronnie and Tommy. Yeah.
Just
in
like,
the showers. Yeah.
It's just very cool stuff that like you wouldn't expect to see like in general anywhere. But like there was just this concentrated population where they allowed them to. They were there for their protection, but they allowed them to like express themselves freely. So there's tons of story about how they would adjust their uniforms and where like they would make lipstick out of Kool-Aid to kind of do their gender expression or whatever I guess they were feeling at the time. There's not like tons of documented stories, but.
And on your hunts, you did. I didn't go with them for this hunt, but that you did that on your hunts. Did you not? Yeah. You recreated that.
Yeah, I definitely had some lovely red lipstick on.
He was very pretty.
But so we actually got to do a lot of research that they hadn't even done for the prison itself in terms of rediscovering this history. And part of that was going to the Ohio Historical Society, where all of these records are kept. And it turns out they're just kept in a bunch of boxes because nobody actually cares about prisoners' history, let alone like queer prisoner history.
So what we did, and Katie was our researcher, and we went through, these were called Bertillon records back at the time. And it was sort of a way, before fingerprints, they would have sort of their physical characteristics, and that was a way they could identify people if they repeated the crime. However, we went after the sodomy convictions. We went through every single record of every prisoner that had ever been in Mansfield, and we found 67 records of imprisoned for sodomy, and some of them ended up dead. This young boy, I believe, was an elevator attendant, and we found disproportionately people of color being convicted for sodomy. And we went back. So this was a prime example of really doing, and I'll show you here, sodomy right there, clearly marked. This was the kind of queer history that we were digging up that no one had ever bothered to look at. So we'll go here pretty quick. I'm gonna let Shane talk about the equipment we use.
Is that the first one?
Yeah. And the first are our dowsing rods. This is probably our most successful. It's the way we start to initially contact entities. Very simple, but you can go ahead and show them the yes and no questions.
Yeah, so they're just copper rods and copper tubes that kind of like, they free move, right? So your focus is basically trying to not make them move yourself. So you have to hold very, very still. But like the theoretical aspect of them being able to work is that because they're more highly conductive to like energy, electromagnetic forces, ghosts can kind of more easily operate them.
Mm-hmm. And we've had great success with this. We might turn off the lights and pull down the shades and do a little quick dowsing rod session at the end here and see if there's any entities joining us. How about that?
That's cool.
But anyway, we also, and we're going to get into this a moment about our approach to ghost hunting. And one of the reasons we use this too, I think ghost hunters need to realize that you watch on TV, they come in, they wire up the house, they have all these gadgets, they have the lights. Imagine if someone just came in your house and did that and you've been alive in 1850. The technology, we believe, sometimes scares the entities. And this is a very simple way to be non-intrusive and make them comfortable with the tools to get an initial conversation started. No.
So the EMF meters record electromagnetic fields, which again is just like one of those like theoretical science type things where allegedly ghosts can manipulate those fields. So they can manipulate the sensors on this, but more importantly, in terms of like actual science and using these, you can use it to detect the electromagnetic fields of a room. And when there's a high like level of electromagnetic fields, people often feel like they're being watched or have like actual hallucinations. So it's important to know that like maybe your house isn't haunted. Maybe you just need to like change the wiring.
But what's staggering is when this starts to move, it goes from green to red. When you have the dowsing rods responding and the EMF responding at the same time, it's quite interesting to see. I'll take this one. So what is an EVP? It is electronic voice phenomenon, okay? And we have had amazing luck with this. As a matter of fact, I'll send you a link to some of our EVP recordings. So an EVP is when, let's say you're doing a hunt, you don't hear anything. But when you go, but we turned on the recorder, and when you go back and listen to that, you hear something. And one of the most obvious ones, we were at Licking County, and we were 5 women. We were sitting in a cell, and we were talking to a woman who we knew historically had lost her child. And we were telling her how much we sympathized, and 3 of the women were mothers in the cell. And when you play that back, you can clearly hear a woman sobbing. Now, once you've experienced something like that, and you were in that cell, and you knew there was no one crying, and you hear that, it's hard to dispute that. And we have some staggering EVPs, and this is a very, very good way to record. Now, you'll have to go back and listen to 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 hours of recording with headphones, but this is really, and a lot of ghost hunters use this. This is really a primary tool that ghost hunters use. And these are just some of the gadgets. Geobox now, you can hear voices. There's all kinds of things that we can use. But again, I think we're pretty old school about it. Because again, the technology isn't always necessary to be able to find entities. And Boo Bears. Explain a Boo Bear.
So a Boo Bear is it's a teddy bear with sensors in it, and one of them is kind of like the spirit box that's in there. So what it allows it to do, so it'll like talk on its own, it'll say things, it's kind of creepy sounding.
Scare the hell out of you if you forget about it being in the corner, that's for sure.
But it's like a familiar object that is like teddy bears have existed for a long time as like a child's toy, so like a lot of people are familiar with them. So it's a great way to kind of like have someone be comfortable to interact with it or come up and touch it, because it's not a scary object, even though it has all of this like technology in it.
But it's hidden and you can't see it
right.
inside. Yeah. But probably our biggest tool is do your homework. Do your homework before you go. This is Katie, who was our main researcher. We would actually do, I think for Mansfield, she did a 19-page report. I mean, really looking into particularly what we thought might be queer history. It's all out there, and we would dig into the records that no one's dug into before. And she would do these reports. So when we went in, we really knew there were some entities we were looking for. Katie had a great, this is some of the entities we have connected with. Mae Varner, this was a woman who set herself on fire in one of the cells. Her husband had divorced her. And we had an amazing Geobox experience where we were talking to her about a husband. In the Geobox, you can clearly hear, and I have this recorded, he didn't love me. You can hear it just as plain as day. Oh, go ahead. You want to?
No, I was gonna say, so Mae's history is kind of interesting. Like she's not recorded a lot in like the local newspapers and stuff. But what is recorded is her like death, and it sounds like based on the research you can do around that maybe her husband was actually like abusive or something. But also she had dated like 2 guys before that who also ended up dead. So Mae Varner might be one of those like secret serial killers who ended up getting caught accidentally. But there's no real way to like do that because, I mean, at the time I was like 19, like '03 or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
There just wasn't a lot of like people writing about the like goings on of this small town in Lincoln County. Anyway,
And there's some red flags too about being a potential queer individual. She had been married, I think it was her third time, and her husband divorced her and made her take back her maiden name. In those days, that was a sign that the marriage was never consummated, which is kind of an odd thing. So those are even the kind of red flags, because no one was waving a rainbow flag in front of their house in 1918. So we look at some of these sort of red flags. And yes, we'll talk about this YouTube series a little bit, but I had a very deep connection with an entity's sister, Madeline, in Collingwood. So intense that I was driving my parents' car and she actually moved into my parents' house. And we had to go back to my parents' house, talk her out of leaving there, and we actually drove her back to Collingwood the next day, presuming she would be there. We're going back June 29th, I think. That'll be the first time we return. If you go, and we'll talk about this a little later, on our Queer Ghosthunters series on YouTube, the first season is dedicated to the story of Collingwood and Madeline. And you will see all this in real time, nothing scripted. It just happened, and you will see our hunts on Thanksgiving, actually, where we try to get Madeline out of the house and back to the convent. So that was really fun. And Sally, right out here at Bryn, you were on this hunt. You can't see it. This is, if you saw, this face, that is staggering to me. That's one of the best pictures. I don't know if you can see it very clearly there. Talk a little bit about Bryn, just down the street from here.
So, Bryn was like a horse farm, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But Sally was the daughter of the guy who originally owned it and built it. She was independently like wealthy as a result of like her family's money, which ended up allowing her to kind of be more independent and I guess like do what she wants. And one of those things was to like be a lesbian and be out. But like anytime it's recorded about her, you know, it's her roommate. Like I don't remember like the names, but you know,
best friends.
Friends.
Yeah.
Like she constantly had this like cadre of like interchangeable women with her. And
some Hollywood actresses.
Yeah.
I mean, she was rich. She traveled in those circles.
But like her story especially is important because so one of the things that allowed people to be out historically was wealth. Like you could do whatever you wanted as long as you had money. And everyone around you would be like, hey, that's cool, no big deal, but we're just not gonna talk about it. So it's all in this coded language. And you have to, one, research the actual language that they were using at the time, but then two, like kind of read between the lines of how it's being reported anytime that it is.
And there was fun. We had a dowsing rod session with Sally. Sally made her appearance very quickly. And she had quickly said that the position of the dowsing rods for the answer no would be out like this, right? So we mentioned to her that this was right after marriage equality had happened, the Obergefell Supreme Court decision. And so we said to Sally, you know, you might not know it, but queer people can get married now. And I said, if you had, back then, would have you chosen to get married? And it went like this. And I said, so that's not just no, that's hell no. She was like, no way am I getting married. And she was really, she was very free and had many women, lovers, and it's a story you won't necessarily go to Bryn and hear, for sure. And that's it. Another face there somewhere. Yeah, just really amazing photo. We had that was in the trunk room. It's the same face that keeps following us around there, looking down at us. And finally, we have a YouTube series on YouTube called Weirdo Stutters. We have 3 seasons now, right? Start at season 1, episode 1, and we'll take you through literally real time how we went and discovered all of this. And you'll see a lot more of the history there. And we were kind of beginning too, so you really see us discovering not only the history, but us discovering you know, how to do this. So have fun with that. Yeah, the Thanksgiving segment is, you know, really fun. Yes, we're in pilgrim gear there. You have to definitely tune into that one. But that was sort of the culmination. And one of the reasons we did this, and we decided, along with the director and producer, to initially it was going to be a 2-hour documentary, him following us around doing this. What we decided to do was do a YouTube series. They're about 9 minutes each. We figured this was a way to reach young people. okay? Even yourselves. This was a way to teach history about our queer community and reach younger people. And we would have comments from 13-year-olds in Iceland and all over the world. So we think it really is effective. There's some more season coming out soon in the fall.
Yeah, so, well, maybe like June, maybe October, or maybe both. But we did an investigation at this 250-year-old farmhouse in the middle of Vermont, where it's been like a million different things throughout the years. But the biggest thing, two biggest things, was that one, it used to be this, the home of a witch who had kind of like her coven would like come and visit her. And there's like a lot of signs that maybe she was labeled a witch because she was a lesbian, and it was a way, like calling a woman a witch was a way to immediately erase any kind of power she had in society. And she was obviously a wealthy woman who owned property, and that was like an immediate way to just be like, no more. Like, the men are here and we're taking it because you're a witch. You can't have that. But then after that, it was, you know, I'm really bad with names today. I don't know what's wrong. But these like brothers owned it, and they had a lot of, it kind of became like a frat boy house during the like 1930s. And which is like, if you picture the middle of nowhere, okay, like in the mountains, and it's literally this farm, okay, so like turning into like all of the guys coming in the community to hang out with you was interesting. But one of the spirits in the house is that guy who owned the house, and he only kind of interacts with and grabs and touches and like pulls the covers off other men when they're sleeping in the house. So we were like, well, let's try to talk to him, because maybe he was gay. But it was a really cool place. And then the last one, is those seasons are kind of shorter. The other one is we were in Seattle at the oldest continuously operating gay bar in the country. It's called the Night Jar. And we had, like, it was a phenomenal experience, and going through like their archives of like the business and getting to see like drag queens and queer people from like the 40s and 50s was really great, and I think it'll make a great several episodes.
So that's coming out.
Yeah.
So do tune in. It is fun, and you know, we kind of make fun of ourselves too. We definitely don't take ourselves too seriously. So that's kind of who we are. I think maybe the next thing to really let you know, and this pertains, I believe, to much more of the subject matter here. One of the things that Shane and I really decided when we started this right away is that we would approach this from a notion of kindness and politeness. I think, again, ghost hunters don't understand how they can go in and create fear in an entity. We wanted to share and when we did this, share our own stories to make the entities feel comfortable, because we don't believe you're going into somebody's home and you need to be polite, and the only way that you're going to connect with an entity is if they feel secure enough to connect with you. So I don't think anyone's ever thought about the fact that you may be scaring the entity as a hunter, as opposed to us being scared by ghosts. And we go in and say right away, we make a little speech, we tell them who we are, and we say we're not interested in any dark entities, and we're here to share about ourselves and to see if there's anyone from our community that would like to share their experience with us, because we figure, why would a queer entity share its story with, you know, people who are going in and presuming that they're heterosexual? And it's been astounding. I say in the series, you know, I thought it would really be hit or miss with queer entities, but we found queer entities everywhere, just like you do in the real world. So that's kind of who we are, and let's talk. Let us know what you want to know, and again, Shane and I have been talking a lot about the notion of fear since we knew we were doing this class, and again, that's fascinating. So, you know, talk to us about your ideas of that and what you think about this.
I have a question. So, while it seems like you guys are trying to gain like a further understanding on like queer history and find like queer entities and all that stuff, in any of like the venues and places you've hunted in, have you ever on accident like encountered like demonic spirits?
I think Licking County, there's a Dark David, I think his name is. and he's in the family quarters, like where the wives and children stay. We say right from the beginning, we want nothing to do with any dark entities. And if we feel that, Shane is, I call him ghost bait. We literally put Shane in a room, and if he's tingling or he's getting some funny feeling, we come in there with the equipment, because Shane is definitely ghost bait. I say it over and over again. If Shane starts to feel something weird or dark, we get out of there. I mean, we say we want nothing to do with this, because we don't. That's not what we're there to find. Is that the only time, Rick? Oh, Crazy Mother Superior in Hollywood. Oh, that's in the first season. We had literally an I'm gonna say it, evil.
Yeah.
Mother Superior basically transmit her rage into one of our, he was a trans man, Kai, who's our video person, and his entire personality changed. I think that's the scariest thing we've ever done with ghost hunting. You could see him change. The most mild-mannered guy in the entire world just changed. And he had gone up and sat, and he had said to her, he made the speech, he said to her, I've been angry too, I understand your rage, I think you are misunderstood. And you know what she did? She said, okay, you want to understand? Here you go. And it was really scary. I think that's probably the darkest. It wasn't necessarily demonic. This was a human being who was mean when she was alive, and then she felt, what she conveyed to Kai was that there's actually an art center there now, and it's where the LGBTQ Pride Center is. She thought it was her house, her home, and the convent was being
Turned into
corrupted,
Yeah.
corrupted, and that's what she was doing. So that's really, but that was scary. That you'll see that in the first season when he encountered her. That was scary, because for a while we didn't know how we were going to get Kai back.
yeah, because he left.
Because he left, yeah. So that was scary. That was scary. Yeah.
So would you say it's like those instances when you experience fear and not when you're communicating with like the queer spirits that are benevolent, so to speak?
Yeah, let's talk about fear and if we've ever been afraid besides those two instances.
Yeah. So I think so when you're, okay, so like there's like the paranormal, and it's weird and it's scary and it's creepy. But if you kind of approach it from a place of trying to understand what's going on, it removes a lot of that like barrier and uncomfortableness that you, I guess, naturally feel in those situations. Like you're in this like creepy old dark building, right? Like, and it's supposed to be haunted, and you know, people will talk about how scary it is. And you go in there with all of that like in your mind, but it's important to just like step back and be like, if ghosts exist, right? Like if we're accepting that as a fact, then they were at one time a person, and we should approach them like people. And there's like talking to you like on the street might be like somewhat uncomfortable, like if I just stopped you and to talk to you, but I'm not afraid of talking to you, and that's how we should approach these.
Yeah. And what you just stumbled on there was, isn't most of fear a misunderstanding? We fear what we don't know. And once we do know, that takes away so much of the fear. And I think particularly with ghost hunting, if you go in expecting to be scared, you probably will be. But understanding and having empathy and sharing with these entities really does remove the fear. It does.
We've been talking about like the paranormal and how just that name evokes fear.
Yes.
And I was wondering, being that there's a lot of outside goals outside of just speaking to these people, it's also an outreach program. Do you feel like using ghost hunting is helpful to like reach a larger audience and get people interested in learning about your history?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like this is an approachable way to discuss things that are super uncomfortable and unfortunate, and like you don't want to hear about people being imprisoned or institutionalized, like most people don't. And like when you make it kind of entertaining, now we can talk about all of these like deep dark secrets that we just don't discuss any other time, and it allows us to broach topics that are kind of outside the mainstream, but are very important to like the history of our country, really.
And taking away, once again, taking away the fear of that, even the uncomfortableness of those issues. From lobotomizing queer people to putting them in prison, all those sort of things we can talk again without, it takes away some of the fear. Again, understanding what happened helps do that. And that is really our mission. And having a worldwide audience to be able to do this on YouTube has really been, it's been extraordinary, it really has.
When you're first walking in and you're like giving your speech to let them know that you don't mean any harm and you want to make them feel comfortable, are you concerned at all, or not concerned isn't the right word, but afraid of like misunderstandings in terms of like terminology? Because obviously there wasn't, I don't know if there was like the word queer
Yes.
and LGBT.
Excellent question. Excellent question. How many conversations? We could do an hour talk about the issue of language with the group, deciding whether or not to call ourselves queer. In the beginning of the show, you will see us self-identifying as our gender identity and our sexual orientation. So we will have a femme, pansexual Victoria, or our trans man, demi-romantic. It was important for us to identify so that people who'd never seen themselves on screen could see themselves on screen. So we talked about that language. Do we identify ourselves? Do we not? We did. So when we went in with the entities, huge issue. Just the word queer is still controversial within our community, especially for people my age and older, is because I was, regularly I lived in New York City for 20 years. In the 80s and 90s, it was not uncommon for someone to call me a queer and spit on me or beat me up or do those sort of things. So the word queer to me is a very triggering word. However, the younger members of our community have taken that word back and empowered that word to be an umbrella term for all of us with our gender identities and our sexual orientation. But going in, so we actually say to the entities when we go in, we usually say first, we are men who love men romantically and sexually, and women who loved women. It may have been called queer in your day. We go through all the terms, but we try to describe it more than use the terms itself. And I was joking when we went to the Opera House. We thought we found an entity like from 1861, and I said, boy, we're gonna have to tell them A, Lincoln was shot, and B, there's marriage equality. That's a lot for an entity to take in. But we would tell them the news because we don't know that any of these entities have any knowledge of the outside world. So we would take this news to them about marriage equality. But we chose that language very carefully in the series, how we self-referenced, and we were very careful about the language that we used in the hunts. And again, we always say queer ghost hunters hunting queer ghosts, because even the word queer ghost hunters is a bit ambiguous. So language was very important and continues to be important as we go on doing this. Very important, yes.
Now we have the tools to kind of look around and know what to look for. Do you find in most places you go there are entities?
I think so. When we go to a location, it's because we've done research and either it could be a new place that we think has the potential to be haunted, or it's a place that is widely accepted as kind of haunted. But if we did an investigation in just this room or something, or this building, maybe it's not haunted. I don't know. It's easy to get kind of false positives, but when you kind of do the research to set yourself up for success, and maybe that's even some perception of you go in there thinking it's haunted, so
Right.
it is haunted, I guess.
But
But
we went to Waverly Sanitarium where
Yeah.
the body chute was, nada.
Yeah,
Nothing.
the place
I
you would
mean,
really
it's
expect.
voted the 8th most haunted location
Yeah.
in the country. Nothing, zero, zilch, nothing. And it'll happen. We'll go out on hunts and those dowsing rods just sit there and they just sit there. We have had that happen. Sure.
So when you return to places, do you find that they remember you or retain the news that you've given them? Do you think they have a capacity for that?
yeah, so especially I think you've probably been to the old Lincoln County Jail the most.
Geez, 7 or 8 times.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
but especially with May, who was on there, she took like an affinity to our group member Katie, and like you can like I could sit in that room for like 3 hours or something and get nothing, and Katie would walk in, and suddenly like you're getting signals like however that this might be May, that was like, hey Katie, like how are you, like what's going on, and
It's like excited,
Yeah.
excited contact too.
Yeah.
With those dowsing breaths. And you know when you hold them, and this happened with me with Madeline, you can start to feel that energy before those dowsing rods move. And a lot of times you can feel that urgent anticipation, like you're so happy to see somebody, I'm so happy to talk. You can actually feel that. I think that's the same thing Katie experiences with May. You can feel that, wow, I'm excited to talk to you again. So yeah, I think there is certainly with the entities, I think you may, just as, now think of it too. If you have an intimate experience with another human being, you remember them. And I think we really need to think of entities much more in terms, not to completely anthropomorphize, but they were humans, we believe, so they need to be treated like humans and be understood that way. Okay.
Are the places you go to like open to the public, or do you like how do you?
Most are, you can schedule those times, so what we would do is you pay one fee, let's say Licking County 500, and then we would have the individuals sort of come with us and break that down. So they are available to the public, but you need to take your own group there. Sometimes they do. Licking County does their own hunts where you can just show up, pay it for it, show up, and they've got the equipment, everything. Somewhere like Bryn doesn't, you have to bring a group in your own. Well, even like Collingwood, they didn't do ghost hunts there. We wanted to go there and we asked them if we could do that.
they do ghost hunts now.
Well, they do it now, yeah. So some we sort of manage ourselves and others are very sort of, very open to ghost hunting and have a regular schedule for people to do that. I will say right now, Licking County is the most active place we have ever been. So if you want to go ghost hunting, look at old Licking County Jail, go to one of their ghost hunts. I guarantee you will have an experience with an entity. So check that out. It's really old Licking County Jail, yeah. And tell them Queer Ghost Hunters sent you.
Do you do any ghost hunting work at like outdoor locations?
So we haven't yet, but yes, actually we did. When we were in Vermont, we did. It's really hard to do it for like the series, right? Because of all the microphones and the cameras, and that's a whole like environment that is out of control. But in terms of like, can you do it? Like absolutely. It's just you have to be more cognizant of the environmental influence on things like recorders and stuff, because like wind or rustling.
It's hard to trust an EVP from outside.
So there's
what about the water? Would that not
Oh,
be
sure.
affected?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's you can do it. It's just you have to be more cognizant of the fact that they're like the wind blowing can influence basically everything, right? And it can. You don't want to be sitting there listening to something and trying to figure out if it's words when it's just the wind blowing through a microphone.
And there is some belief in ghost hunting circles that, let's take somewhere outside like a cemetery, that actually people find cemeteries very scary. Ghosts don't hang out in cemeteries. You want to hang out in the place that you loved, or the place that even maybe where a traumatic occurrence happened. There's no bonding to the cemetery. So generally, ghost hunters don't hunt in cemeteries too often at all. Yeah.
Have you found that the ghosts usually stay, as you just said, sort of in places that they loved or like something happened? If they like passed away there, or do they travel there, I guess, after?
Well, the whole Madeline thing changed we just didn't think ghosts got in the cars. And I invited him in too. You'll see in the series, I'm in the cemetery, we visit the nuns before we go to the convent and all of their gravestones, and I'm like, come on in, get in the car, everybody in, let's go to the convent. You don't do that as a ghost hunter. You generally don't I didn't invite him home, but I shouldn't have even invited them in the car. But I think because of the Madeline experience, we sort of changed. I think we thought maybe they stayed put, but it looked like Madeline had hitched a ride, and we never thought in terms of entities like that.
Yeah, so I like to think of like when hauntings happen, it's either like your favorite place that you ever were, and like that's like for whatever reason you like decided not to go into like whatever afterlife situation exists, but you were like, I want to hang out at like my home forever or whatever. Or it was a place where something really bad happened, and maybe you don't want to like relive that, but you can't like let go of it. And whatever that energy creates is like what is keeping you there. But if it was like a really happy experience, to me it makes sense that like maybe my favorite place was like my house or whatever, but sometimes I really want to go to the zoo. So like why can't I go haunt the zoo? Right? Like if we're accepting all of this is true, right? Like why isn't that possible then?
And we just don't know. I mean, we just don't know.
Do you believe in Ouija boards?
Like, yeah. I just, it's one of the, so the other thing I try to think of, and maybe this is like more applicable here. It's like Ouija boards, like everyone's like, oh, that's like how you contact like a demon, blah, 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 blah. But like, I don't really believe in demons. I think it's more like how there's good people in like the living world and bad people. Like demons are really just like negative bad people.
You know,
right?
demons are just assholes. They're assholes in life, they're assholes in death. Excuse my language, but
Yeah.
we say that all the time. You know, you're not gonna die and suddenly become a non-asshole if you're an asshole. It's just, and I think people interpret demons as just, you know, mean people who are mean in real life, so they're gonna be mean in the afterlife, you know?
I was gonna ask what defines a dark entity, and I guess that answered the question. And then I guess the follow-up is, you mentioned your cameraman, becoming like a spirit inhabiting
Yes,
him.
yes.
How did that take place?
Well, actually, he was sitting up in the balcony where she notoriously is, and this is when this happened. And he suddenly stands up and says, I've got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And he leaves. We're all standing around, where's Kai gone? And he went downstairs to the hallway and went outside. And what he says happened was he literally felt dragged down to the hallway. And on that hallway, and it's where the LGBTQ Pride Center is, there were paintings, okay? And there were paintings of diversity and inclusion, and one of them sort of like a Mexican mural sort of thing, Diego Rivera sort of thing. And he says she made him look at that. She made him look at that. And this overwhelming feeling that they are denigrating and they are blaspheming my house. And he said once that realization came to him, she left. It's that she wanted to explain to him why she was so upset. And the minute that happened, Kai came back. And he talks about it in the series. There's one episode devoted especially to this. And you know, we thought, well, maybe we didn't make a change with this Mother Superior, but when's the last time she got to explain to everybody why she was so angry? You know? And again, once you understand that, we started to fear Mother Superior less, because now we understood what was making her upset. Now, was it homophobia? Yeah, probably. That's exactly what she didn't like, a bunch of queers being in her convent. But again, understanding, I think we would go back there with a little bit of a different notion. We'll go June 29th.
Yeah.
And maybe contact Mother Superior again and see if we can't continue that conversation. But I'll tell you what, talk about fear, I'm a little bit afraid of her. I mean, I really am, just seeing the transformation that came over Kai. What if she gets there and you can't get rid of her? You know, I don't, it's a little scary when you see something like that happen. It's much scarier than, you know, having something fall or hearing a voice or thing. That kind of completely taking over someone's personality. That's scary. And what's interesting, didn't take a demon to do that. It took a Mother Superior, angry, rageful. Maybe that's what demonic really is, and just not understanding that.
Have there ever been instances in ghost hunting, like creators recruiting mediums? How do mediums, could they communicate with spirits in terms of ghosts?
Yeah.
Like, have they ever been brought on? Like, it sounds like a great way to connect with spirits.
Absolutely.
Besides the actual tools.
Yeah, so a lot of like teams or whatever do have like mediums and psychics involved with their groups. one of the things, so like, I'm willing, like, I've met people who like are capable of doing that or have like told me things about myself that I was like, how would you know that? So I'm like willing to believe there's something there. But one of the issues I have with using it as like an investigating tool is that there's no way to verify that, right? Like I'm not getting anything else going on like to like substantiate what you're saying. So we use research to try to like gauge what's going on and then try to use these other tools to like confirm that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
but it would be interesting, I mean, we're certainly not above,
No, yeah.
taking someone and seeing how that works, maybe working with them, again, using sort of the tools to confirm what she or he says or they say. Might be interesting, that's something we could definitely try. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. First, like, what do you think of like the Paranormal Activity movies?
Shane knows them all, he knows every paranormal series on, I'm gonna let Shane take
So
that one.
I think, so what happens with a lot of like the Hollywood like paranormal activity movies or like just like ghost hunting, scary movies in general, is that they're all using like the fear that we all like share of the unknown to like get a response and to be engaging. So like, do I think any of that stuff could happen? Not really. Like I just don't see like a ghost like pulling you out of bed and like dragging you down the hallway. Like that's just that like all of it sometimes when I'm talking about it seems ridiculous. Okay, but that seems really ridiculous.
But like I said, fear sells.
Right.
Fear sells, and who's gonna tune in, and when you watch the series, we have a very different approach than somebody barreling in the dark, and it sells. There wouldn't be all these series around or movies if fear didn't sell, but it's not necessarily the interest in what they're doing. I think it's much more the fear. It is the fear that really is selling, and in a way it allows you to experience fear in a very safe situation.
So you just mentioned how you don't believe like ghosts like grab you and put down the hallway, but then at the very beginning you said that while you were in a place you just got grabbed or something. What can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we were in Lincoln County Jail, and there's a little room. It used to be a chapel. It's like a pantry now. So we walked in there, and there was a single crutch against the wall. Nothing else was in the room. And Shane and I were there. And I am a photographer too part of the time, and so I bent down to take a picture of that crutch, and this wasn't a little touch, something grabbed me on the back of my leg so hard. I screamed, thank God I had a strap on my camera. I screamed, it was my first time ghost hunting. I screamed, go running into the room. Shane comes in, they put the dowsing rods in my hand, and man, does that start going. We never figured out who it was. But I always joked, Shane always said, I never thought I'd hear Lori scream like a girl, but you screamed like a girl running into the other room. We all do, and men scream too. So anyway, it was more an attention getting, I think. And you're all the time, you're more touched.
Yeah.
They're always kind of reaching out to touch him, and I first of all, he's pretty, I'm sure that's why. But mine felt like more of an intention grabbing than it was to pull me or hurt me or anything like that. And I think it's sometimes what you feel with a grab or a touch that determines the intention of the entity when they're doing that. But talk a little bit about, and why you aren't afraid of being touched. Most people can think about that and think, wow, I'd really be afraid to be touched.
Yeah, so a lot of the times it'll feel kind of like, it's almost like spider webs, right? It's like, but it's that like staticky kind of like light feeling, okay? But then other times, like what Lori's describing is you can feel, it's almost like someone like grabs your arm to like a hey, or like get your attention, or like don't go yet, that kind of touch. Which is why I was like, I don't believe that like it could like jerk you out of bed, because there's just not, like, I don't know, just like the amount of like energy that something that doesn't have like a body that would be like, yeah, like it just seems ridiculous, like on top of everything else.
Yeah.
That's just like up here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like, and it doesn't scare me, I guess, because so like what got me interested in the paranormal was like the house I lived in was haunted, and then when I was in law school, like that house was haunted. Like that was like crazy haunted. Like that's when I was like, I want to like investigate this and figure out how to deal with it, because it's either that or move out, because this is actually scary. And it was that like curiosity and the like desire to kind of understand like that world and like how I was responding to it, that kind of just made me go, you know, if I just go ahead and accept that was a person, then I can just talk to it and I can interact with it. And it's, I don't know, it just like evaporates the fear when you just remind yourself that it was a person.
And it's something we were talking about in anticipation of this class, we were talking in the car yesterday, how much it determines your frame of mind determines whether or not you're afraid. And one of the things we really started talking about is, we were talking earlier, how our Western civilization, Western religion is based on the visits of angels and all that kind of stuff. No one thinks of a visit from an angel as scary. Well, if something came in with big wings, it would probably scare me more than you know, a ghost entity. So why, when we have ghosts and then we have angels, why is one fearful and one not? And if we even go back, we were talking about, you know, the story of Moses on Mount Sinai, the basis of 3 major religions. If that isn't a supernatural experience, going to the top of the mountain and coming down with 2 tablets that God wrote himself, you know, our whole civilization and Western religions are based on the paranormal. It is a part, we don't find that scary. So I think it really is often your frame of mind and the frame of your beliefs that determine whether or not you encounter fear or you encounter comfort of the 2.
So we've talked about like in relation to queerness, like lobotomies and institutionalization, and so on the topic of religion, how do you think possession and sort of exorcism as punishment, especially for queerness, sort of ties into that and the spirits that you've encountered, if at all?
Well, you know, I don't really believe in possession, honestly. And I think one of the reasons is because we now understand mental illness so well, that a lot of times it's mental illness. However, the real life story of the film that The Exorcist was based on, okay, happened in 1949, possession of a 14-year-old outside of Washington, D.C., is compelling if you know the original story. There is a great podcast, I just turned Shane onto it last night. There is a great podcast, 7-part podcast called Inside the Exorcist. And one of the things it does is it goes back and talks about the original possession of Robbie in 1949. It's very compelling. So I think for me, the jury is out about possession, but for some reason it always takes on religious connotation. And I don't think, even if there is possession, that's not necessarily true. I think maybe a person has an intense connection to an entity, but it would be interesting to sort of think of possession more in like a folk way. You know, there were exorcisms by folk medicine practitioners for years and years and years. And sometimes a mere suggestion of the exorcism was enough to stop the possession, but I don't know, but listen to that original story. It's compelling. It really is.
So on that topic, so a lot of the language and conversation around the paranormal and ghosts has an underlying like religious connotation. And one of the things that we try to do, and I think what has helped like frame our way of investigating and our way of talking about it, is to remove that. So like exorcisms, like sure, like that transference of energy of like something else to something else, like do I think that can happen? Yeah. Do I think I need to call like a Catholic priest who is like certified by the Vatican to remove that? No, because I don't necessarily believe that the Vatican Church has any more significance to what I'm doing than like Lori does. Like why can't Lori do it? You know what I mean? Like,
well, and let's take what happened with Kai. Let's imagine that Mother Superior hadn't left Kai, okay? Because this is kind of a possession in a way. I think to understand possession more in what happened with Kai is the idea of possession. This is someone, an entity expressing their emotions through you, and it's such an intense emotion. And again, so think of that. If Mother Superior hadn't left Kai, would we call it a priest? Why? What, you know, we would have had to find another way in sort of appealing directly with the entity. I don't think any of us would have thought to call an exorcist or anything to get rid of that. We would have had to, like Madeline, finally talk Mother Superior into leaving. And that's about, almost human to human and empathizing and understanding each other. That would be my idea of an exorcism, I think.
When you guys go to like a particular site, do you all have like a common like goal, or do they like what do you want when you go to a site? What do you want out of it, or does it like vary depending on where you go?
I mean, it totally varies, but part of like, so if we go to a location, we've done the research, and like we're there because there's a certain story that we want to tell, and like that doesn't always work out in terms of like actually speaking with the entities involved. But we get to like capture and investigate, but we also get to talk about all of that history like leading up to going into the investigation. And that kind of frames a lot of what we do, is exploring that history and hopefully like sharing that knowledge with other people.
And getting that acknowledged by an entity itself, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
It really is, it really is.
Would you ever consider coming to a college campus or doing, I just feel like there's so much diverse history here in particular.
We've heard that. When I did a haunted women seminar a couple years ago, and y'all talked about, did you not, you went on a ghost hunt here, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Well, we didn't like go as a unified class on a ghost hunt. It was more, you guys donated dowsing rods to us briefly.
That's right.
So we had some people go to Swayze Chapel. That's a huge chapel you see on the way in. We had some people go to the basement there, and they made contact with some entities. I tried to communicate with an entity in my room, which was kind of a wash. Really wasn't sure if I was moving the dowsing rods or if gravity was moving them.
Right. It's hard for gravity to move them. Where is one here? Real quick? I'll show you this too a little bit closer. See, again, it's just a little, it's hard, you have to swing them. And when you are doing dowsing rods, and you're very still, straighten out for me. Is there anybody here? Straighten out right away from me. Straighten out. Is anybody here? Anyway, you can see they'll move, okay? I'm not moved. There would be no way for me to move these in tandem unless you could see my hands moving. It's very compelling, and you'll see on screen that we're clearly not moving these. Again, this is just like this. So chances are gravity, and here's what the weird thing is too. So when we start, we will say, for example, okay, put the rods out straight, and what we do is we get a signal for yes or no. It can be this, it can be this, it can be this, it can be any combination. And what is staggering with all the ghost hunts we've done, it's not like the answer is once like this, and then once like this, and once like that. The answers are so consistent, it's staggering once they determine what that is. And once you determine, so there's no set yes or no on the dowsing rods. We let the entity define that themselves. So, if you see it moving in a particular way, it's probably not gravity. I mean, you can see it's really there is something in here. There really is. I can feel these moving.
But even so,
there we go.
skeptics.
See, as you can clearly see, I'm not moving these rods. Now, maybe the rotation of the earth or something could move one way, but you're not going to get that kind of reaction.
Skeptics love to talk about the like micro movements of your body, or like even your heart beating.
Here, pass those around a little bit.
But you can like feel when your body moves them.
Or you can pass it along if you like. And you got, make sure and that's the biggest thing, you're not going to keep your fingers up there. You don't have to, okay, who's ever in here, leave the youngsters alone with this right now. Just let them feel the dowsing rods here. But that's about as low tech as you can get. That's not going to scare anybody, And I'll tell you something, and what happened with Madeline, they asked who Madeline wanted to talk to, and when those dowsing rods moved and pointed to me, it's a weird feeling. Yeah, and you see, you keep them low so your hand doesn't get in the way. There you go. Now see, you tell me, you try to move those in a certain way.
Whoa, hello there.
So again, you can see that it's very hard, when you'll see in the series, it's very direct movement, very hard to do that and fake that. It really is, it really is. Do you have an EMF meter in there?
I don't know how to feel about
Let's just set an EMF meter out there.
Yeah.
Because with all of the technology now, and the amount of EMF that's everywhere.
Right.
Has that complicated the searches in terms of just now how much?
Yeah, Shane was saying earlier, it might just be your basement needs good wiring.
Right.
But what'll happen is it'll be consistent, and often we will walk around the room first to find any hot spots. But what's gonna happen is it's gonna be consistent. We'll leave this right here. It's gonna be consistent more or less. You won't find a flash and then in a response at the same time. A lot of times it's when it's in tandem with the other tools. So the dowsing rod's moving and the EMF is flashing up to red. This is what an EMF looks. And I'll tell you honestly, you'll see in the Madeline episode, it was way up in the red. We don't see this often go beyond green or yellow. If something's getting it to red, it's pretty intense. It's